Hi, Joel. Great to see you. Obviously, I've had the pleasure of being at the Tour de France way back in, I think it was Malo, I want to say on the west, on the coast. I was amazed at that production. So let's kind of start with just the feed that you're taking in. Gives people an idea of kind of the circus that goes around that show, and the fact that people who are on the start line never meet the people who are on the finish line and that kind of stuff. So give us some background as far as the show and what people should know about it.
Yeah, it's a good starting point when you mentioned the start line and finish line. I sort of take that for granted because it's just part of it. But yeah, most people wouldn't understand that there's a whole crew at the start while there's another crew at the finish. And by the time the crew at the start get to the finish, everybody's in their own world. And then when the show ends, the crew at the finish leaves and the crew at the start line stays in that finish town. But yeah, as far as with the feeds, we have an ISO of everything that the French 2 host production put out. And so there's 5 motos, 2 helicopters continuously coming in. And we have our own moto reporter. That's our guy. And there's a special feed that puts like slow motion replays on there. And we have a 3D virtual map that shows where the riders are on the course. And so when we were on site, that was just all coming into our main OB truck, just like any other show, and we would have access to it. The challenge was with COVID not being on site, our production being based out of a control room in Stanford, how do we cut that same show and get all those feeds back? And so the solution was to stick an SNG truck with a small crew at the finish. They take all of those lines in, and then we have 3 transmission paths coming to us in Stanford, where one of them is a multi-view of showing us all of our signals, and the other 2 we're just switching. So it's a step extra for the director, Sean Page. Big shout out to him for making it happen. He's going to be real deliberate and real good communicating. And the guys sub-switching for us in the truck on site to get us Moto 5 or whatever source we want. So that's definitely like a little bit of a extra challenge, but happy to say that for the last, 3 years now, it has worked out pretty well.
Right.
And I don't think the viewers would ever notice a difference.
Can you walk through now? Obviously, the other thing that was fascinating was how every shot in that whole entire show, the whole 6 hours of coverage, 7 hours of coverage every day, is planned out to the, every little castle that they show is like they have all kind of information. Do you get that whole book so you know where they're going with their show? Talk about that whole, it's like about this.
Yeah.
I recall seeing it.
Yeah. They call it the commentary book because at some point, and this is actually something that Paul Sherwin, who we lost a little while ago, he actually started being a curious mind. A little backstory on this, because I just found this out not too many years ago. When they were showing those chalets and the different castles and the various landmarks along the way, which there's tons of them, he was actually the curious one to say, hey, I'd be interested to know about those when they show them, instead of just showing them. So he sort of forced the ASO, the creators, to create that. It's probably like over 1,000-page book with every single landmark that they would consider showing. They don't show every single one, which is a little challenging, but they give us a good idea of the ones they will show. And each one has a picture of it in that book and a little paragraph to summarize it. So right. Our commentators don't memorize, which I get that question a lot. They don't memorize every single thing in France, but they quickly look at it, identify it in the book they're following along. It usually has the how many K to go on the route as the indicator. So they look up, oh, that looks like that, and they go from there. But yeah, a lot of effort from the ASO and the French director to actually put that book together. I mean, if you ever look through there, you'd be fascinated. It's a giant history book with a lot of the good nuggets. And as you know, people watch the tour not only for the riding and the competition, but for those beautiful shots.
Walk us through some of the technologies. Obviously, the VR stuff and the AR stuff has really made a big difference as far as helping fans understand what's going on in the race. You go back even 10 years ago, it was a much different experience watching it. So walk us through how technology has kind of evolved and changed the way you're able to tell the stories.
Yeah, it's been a goal of mine, because I noticed when I was younger, and I know I look young, but I've been doing this for 20 years. So when I was starting out, I found a real big disconnect from mainstream sports and the tour, where I felt like the people who were producing when I was a PA didn't try to use things that would be used, X's and O's, and sort of breaking it down like other sports to make you understand. So luckily the technology evolved where working with the ASO, anytime I've challenged the ASO, being the Omri Sports organization who put the event on, to say, hey, we do this kind of thing in other sports. Can we come up with a technology to make this work for the Tour de France so people can consume it and understand it? And the first iteration of that, which has become like a go-to for me, is putting the riders on like a virtual, not the virtual 3D stuff in the studio, but on a map on the course, to show where the groups are. Because when you're watching the race, especially if you tune in mid-race, there's a lead group of 5, there's a chase group of 3, there's a peloton of 150, and then there's guys behind those guys. And it just cutting from camera to camera, even if I identify those with chips, it's just disorienting. And so whenever it's a little bit disorienting, I go to that virtual map. You can literally see all the groups in one frame. There's the group behind, there's the peloton, and then you go, oh, okay, you have a little perspective, which I think was a big accomplishment to make people understand. The next level is the virtual stuff you mentioned with the augmented 3D stuff. And we do that in the studio. And that's just a fun way that looks cool for my talent to play around with guys in what we call the sandbox, to say, hey, when they're coming to a sprint, this guy's job is this guy's this. We intermix, actual video clips with it. But it's also been interesting that using that tool, it's like we have the tool. How can we use it? Is like forced my talent in me to come up with creative ways to utilize it. Where initially it was just riders. Then you take it to the next level, and we're like, hey, what if we put a team car in there to show a barrage, for example? We did this, right. Or how we make little guys on the side of the road with the feed bags. Like, let's show as much as we can in there. So we got cars and feed bags and all kinds of things that, like, you see it in front of you. And I've had lots of people be like, wow, I never understood what that was until you did it in the 3D reality sandbox. So right. That's been really cool. And what I did also, because of COVID, with our studio being back in Stanford, when we were doing it originally, we were on site in the studio for the augmented reality. The challenge, most people don't, so hard to do that outside in daylight, quote unquote daylight. So when we brought it back here, it's a lot more easy to control. You don't have to set it up every day. It's static in our controlled environment. We have control of the lighting, and it looks good. To my own home, but I think it looks great.
Yeah. So how have things changed? You've mentioned 3 years. So how have things evolved as far as your understanding of this way of doing the event, producing the event, and how has it improved, I guess, in the last 3 years?
Yeah, sure. It's like first thing of like, hey, we're not going to be able to go to France. I'm pushing the panic button like, whoa, what are we going to do? I'm sure every TV production that had to deal with being at home as opposed to site figured that out. Luckily, the people in the building that I'm in here in Stanford are genius at technology, and we worked together to come up with that system. But we make it better every year. This year, with having the ability to put people on site because of COVID, with Phil Liggett being older, comfortable. COVID's a little better situation now. So we put Phil and Bob on site, and the goal of when they were there this year, my personal goal, and I think the company as well, is, well, if we have the commentary on site rather than in a box or a booth here in Stanford and in Sky in London for Phil, how can we take advantage of that presence on site to make it feel like we're there more, like we have a on-site presence, a sense of place. And so if you've seen the coverage, I tried to show it as much as we could to establish they're in what Phil Liggett called his little yellow box, which was like, again, if you've been there, so people who haven't been there, there's hundreds of trucks in the TV compound at the finish. So we made ours bright and yellow so that when we showed that from an exterior shot, you could say, oh, there we are right by the, and the other benefit was pre-COVID, we had a big giant studio, which looked good when we had a good backdrop, but because it was so big, parking it, people don't think of these things, right? Parking it somewhere in the zone technique where it actually fit and had a view on a mountain, it might have been easier, but in small little cities and in a really, really small area, sometimes you're just sitting in front of a brick building. What we learned by accident this year was having that little tiny Sprinter van meant we could go wherever we want at the finish. So we were lucky that we were like at the finish. I would say 50% of the time we had a shot where you could see us finish. Here we are, we're here. So that was like a big added value to being able to send Phil and Bob this year. And I thought it was good. And then we also added this year, again, this is all as a result of COVID, you experiment. The first year we had forced to do this with the COVID stuff, we had one live view system to do interviews on site. Now this year we had two, because I realized with Steve, if you watch the show, Steve Perino was kind of like the roving reporter. Like, Steve, go anywhere and just do hits from anywhere in the route. And it's a lot of work what he's doing to get on TV for a couple minutes, 4 or 5 times a day, but it really helps give you more perspective from what the fans are experiencing on site. He's at the top of a mountain, the guys are coming by, like what that feels like, coming into random people on the side of the road that have interesting backstories and things like that. So those 2 big things I think it made it feel like we're here and we have a bigger sense of presence on site this year.
It's cool because when you go back again 10, 12 years, I remember talking to the folks who would be in charge of kind of setting up the stage, figuring out where you're going to put the satellite trucks for each stage.
Right.
How you have to knock on someone's, some farmer's house
Yes.
and say, we're going to go in your backyard for a month and hang out there. Is that okay? And
right.
And to be able to use the live view and these kind of technologies is amazing,
Yeah,
so
that was a game changer for sure.
Yeah, sure. So what's on your wish list then, or what's on your viewers and your fans wish list for next gen?
Well, you're jumping ahead of me here. I just slept for the first time in a month.
Right.
Yeah, put on the spot. Because it's overwhelming how much to take a step back when you're going into it with the new ideas that we went this year. And actually, it's interesting. Every year we add something and we do it differently. I'm always a little nervous, like, how is this going to come off? But at the end of it, you're just like, wow, that was really, really cool. And that all worked out pretty easily. There is something that I'd like to work on. And I don't know if people notice it, but because of there's a serious challenge with the actual audio. And I'm not smart enough to give you all the exact details, but the people in this building are. And long story short, we have commentary on site calling our program out of a control room. We have a guy in a moto and we have a studio, and all 3 of those have to talk to each other. And so with the delays, which you can imagine just thinking about that's right. Challenging. And just the delay, and this is probably everybody with a remote, just the delay of our program to Phil and Bob, it's like a half second off. And as a perfectionist, I'm like, I wish this was all not a challenge. When we actually have to go from Phil and Bob commentating the race to throwing them on camera, we have to do a switch to make the delay work so that their lips match and things like that. That's like a little nuance to the show that, again, the average viewer probably doesn't notice, but in my mind, I'm like, that'd be good if we could accomplish that one day. And I don't know technology if it would be there, but that's a big one on my list for sure.
Sure. Good old latency. Always
Always
the bugaboo. Always the bugaboo.
Oh, and then 100% internet connection all the time in the middle of France.
Oh yeah, good look at that.
Like if that was it, and we used there's an orange set up an internet at the finish compound every day, which is our main way to get the commentary. But we have the what's the one that Elon Musk has as our backup, the Star Tracks or whatever. That's our backup, which we had to use that a handful of times this year because like I said, you're in the middle of a random mountain and random villages, and sometimes the internet just doesn't. It just goes out.
Sure. Exactly. Excellent.
That's the other part. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Joel. Really appreciate it. Yeah, get some rest. I know it's been long days and long nights. So
yeah, for sure.
Well deserved.
Thank you, sir.